Well, we have been talking about the Cowichan land title case on this program, and the initial ruling from the BC Supreme Court recognized that the Cowichan tribes have the right to 7.5 kilometers of land in Richmond. Now, the ruling found that the land titles granted by the provincial government were invalid, and while the First Nation did not seek to have the titles of privately held properties declared invalid, the court said the Crown's granting of private property ownership rights also infringed on Cowichan Aboriginal title. Now, this would mean that the title would need to be resolved through negotiation or litigation or purchase. Otherwise, the properties would remain under Cowichan title lands. Now, this is some residents in the area worried about what it means for their homes and for their futures. One of those residents is Anna Wojtowicz. She's now in her 80s. She's lived on the property all of her life, and here she is speaking with her husband, Paul Wojtowicz.
You know, we could be thrown out. Somebody can just come and say, oh, you know.
No, I'm worried that they would claim it, and then we have to pay a lease amount, and that could be like $3,000 a month. That's what they're charging for this type of property for renting.
So that is Paul and Anna Wojtowicz, longtime Richmond residents. And to speak more on this, we're joined by the leader of the BC Conservative Party, John Rustad, joins us. Good morning to you.
Good morning to you as well. Thanks for having me on this morning.
Thank you.
Can I just start off with saying, I'm a big Blue Jays fan. Congratulations to the team. Go Jays, go. I'm looking forward to the World Series.
You're not the first to say that this morning, so we will take that as well. Thank you very much. Now, the province, the city of Richmond, and the Musqueam First Nations are all appealing this decision. What action would you like the provincial government to take instead? Because you're not happy with what they're doing now.
The appeals process is going to take somewhere between 5 and 8 years, not just winding through the provincial appeals court, but also going through the Supreme Court of Canada. And the challenge we have right now is this creates an enormous uncertainty. How do you get a mortgage? How do you decide to buy a home if you don't know what the value of that is because of this uncertainty? Not to mention, it drives uncertainty beyond this. 120% of British Columbia is claimed by First Nations, which means every square inch of BC, all of our lands, all of our cities, everything is being claimed as potential title. And so it creates a problem in terms of driving investment in British Columbia and being able to have some sort of stability. I mean, private property is the foundation of our economy. It's the foundation, quite frankly, of our society. And right now that is being put in question because of this court case. So we can't wait this length of time. We need to actually have resolution much faster so that we do not see our economy freeze up.
But private property rights in BC, though, I mean, we did not engage in the treaty process that the rest of Canada did, largely in this province. And when BC joined Canada back in 1871, the provincial government just outright denied the existence of Aboriginal title. It took the position that the colonial legislation had already extinguished that. We know that that is something that is no longer accepted by modern courts.
Yeah, so the issue is private property rights were never protected in our Constitution, where Indigenous rights are protected in the Constitution. And there's where you have the challenge, because Indigenous rights, particularly when it comes to title, means they can have use of the land, they can go on the land, they can do what they want for it, and they can benefit from it. Well, that is in direct conflict with private property rights. And so this does need to be resolved. There's no question, because it is not defined in our Constitution. And so what we need actually to put a reference question directly to the Supreme Court of Canada so we can get this resolved quickly, and asking the Supreme Court, does private property rights extinguish Indigenous title where there's an overlap? Now, that doesn't mean there isn't compensation, there's a negotiation that needs to be done, but we need to have the clarity between private property rights and Indigenous rights. And the only way to do that is to put the question directly to the Supreme Court so that we can have this answered quickly.
I know that the process is long and sometimes onerous, but it is the process. We go from the BC Supreme Court to the Court of Appeal, and then we go to the Supreme Court of Canada. You know, why jump that middle bar, the Court of Appeal in British Columbia?
Because at this point, like I say, it's going to take too many years, and we cannot have that kind of uncertainty for people. I mean, you had an elderly couple on, just before we started this show, talking about the impact to their properties. They can't wait 5 or 10 years to find out what this is. Not to mention, once it's ultimately resolved in the Supreme Court of Canada, if Indigenous title is found to still be there, there could be back compensation that private property owners may need to pay because of the title finding and how this goes through. So the uncertainty and the amount that is there is just, it's unacceptable.
Sure, and but that what you're saying though is speculative.
Well, I mean, at this point, who knows what it is?
Well, exactly.
First Nations. But the issue is this: First Nations have the right on title land to benefit, and the Silcoteen case is very clear in that where that benefit has been impacted by decisions from the Crown is required to provide an accommodation for those previous impacts. So that is what is at stake here with this issue.
We heard from Robert Morales, who's the chief negotiator for the Hulkaminum Treaty Group and a member of the Cowichan tribes. He spoke on BC Today, our noontime program, about what he thinks the focus should be since title has already been granted by the BC Supreme Court. I just want you to hear a bit of what he said.
We'll have the opportunity to sit down with Canada and British Columbia to negotiate a resolution to this issue. For now, they have a declaration of title and a court ruling with regard to how the court is viewing how this issue should move forward. So I think it puts those nations in a position to be able to deal with the issue of what are the land rights of Indigenous peoples when government has granted away those rights.
And so, Mr. Rustad, why not accept this ruling and begin negotiations on how the implementation of this would take place within, as we are bound to, within the spirit of reconciliation and Undrip, as we are bound in this province?
So I would maybe put it to you this way as a question mark. So if we accept the ruling, that would mean that potentially every community in the province could be Aboriginal title. Could you imagine what the compensation for, let's say, downtown Vancouver would be? And whether the people of British Columbia and the people of Canada could afford to pay that compensation?
On a case,
this is what is at stake with the issue of title versus private property rights. And actually, quite frankly, I think what we really need to be having a conversation about is changing our constitution. We should actually be looking at enshrining private property rights in our constitution.
Yesterday, Merle Alexander also spoke to CBC. He's an Indigenous resource lawyer based in Victoria, and he co-drafted BC's Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act. He's a member of the Kitsuhehe First Nation. He talked about his reservations about taking the court route. Here's what he said.
I don't think that the solution is to further litigate, because I think there's a real risk in that legal strategy, and that if the BC government takes, if the BC Court of Appeal further elaborates on this lower court decision, then it will become binding law throughout British Columbia. And I think that's the real risk of the current BC government strategy, to just appeal the case.
And isn't that what you're trying to avoid, the establishment of that kind of binding law across British Columbia without it first going to the Supreme Court?
Well, the court decision has already done that. It has already created that scenario that he just referred to. Because if it's not appealed, then it becomes the law. It becomes binding. And so, we're in a situation right now where we actually have First Nations from outside of Canada claiming, title, claiming rights in British Columbia because of the way this is set up now with our constitution and the process that has been set up with this government and its approach to how it deals with things, especially even when it comes to environmental assessment. This cannot happen. We can't be seeing a band in the United States owning and claiming and owning a title in British Columbia. That just doesn't make any sense whatsoever. We're Canada, we're British Columbia. We need to exert our sovereignty. And yes, there are First Nations and the First Nation rights, and we need to negotiate and work through that. But we have to recognize that this is Canada and this is British Columbia. And so these sort of things need to be worked through. But what I'm suggesting is, for the certainty that we need for our economy, for people, especially, for people retired, most homes are their greatest source of wealth that they have, and their retirement is based on it. That uncertainty cannot exist. We need to be able to enshrine this in our constitution, not to the exclusion of being able to negotiate with First Nations, but to provide the certainty that's needed for people in British Columbia.